Imagine for a second, right, that you just stumble across a diary.
Okay.
And not just any diary, it's this deeply personal, devastatingly public record of a profoundly broken marriage.
Which immediately grabs your attention, obviously.
Exactly. I mean, you start reading it expecting this tragic, intimate tale of betrayal between a husband and a wife. You're kind of bracing yourself for the private arguments, the shattered trust, the visceral pain of a relationship just completely falling apart.
Right.
But as you turn the pages, the language starts to shift. The scale gets, larger.
And its scope just blows up.
Right. The betrayals described stop sounding like domestic disputes and they start sounding like high treason. Suddenly you realize this isn't a memoir of a domestic disaster at all.
Not even close.
No. This diary is actually a courtroom indictment of an entire nation.
It's wild. It forces whoever is reading it to reconcile two incredibly different spheres. I mean, you think you're reading about a marriage bed, but you're actually reading about international geopolitics, economic exploitation, and a literal cosmic crisis.
It's a massive bait and switch.
It is, and the shock value of that transition is entirely the point.
Yeah.
The private heartbreak is basically a mirror, reflecting a society that has just completely lost its moral and spiritual anchor.
Well, welcome to this deep dive into the Book of Hosea. We are using Chris Arvelas's comprehensive survey of Hosea as our guide today. And our mission for you, the listener, is to completely shatter any preconceptions you might have about this text.
Throw them right out the window.
Literally. Because if you're thinking this is a dry, historical overview of a dusty ancient scroll, we're not doing that. We are going to explore how one of the most poetic, imagistic, and frankly scandalous books of the ancient world uses these visceral family and sexual metaphors to explain a broken covenant between God and his people.
Yeah, it doesn't hold back at all.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because Hosea is fundamentally a wake-up call. It's designed to make its original audience deeply, deeply uncomfortable.
Absolutely. And to understand the weight of that wake-up call, we really have to look at where Hosea sits in the Hebrew Bible.
Right, the context.
Yeah. It is the very first book of the 12, which is the collection we often call the Minor Prophets.
Though minor just means shorter, right? Not less important.
Exactly, just shorter in word count. But Hosea serves as the thematic gateway for everything that follows in that collection. I mean, the core motifs that dominate the rest of the prophetic literature are all here.
Like what, specifically?
Well, things like the breach of a covenant, the profound grief of the divine, the inevitability of judgment, and then the mechanism of ultimate restoration. All of those blueprints are drafted right here in Hosea.
So it's kind of laying the groundwork for the rest of the prophets.
It is. But what's fascinating here is that Hosea introduces a very specific tension that challenges a lot of basic assumptions about divine justice.
How so?
It presents a framework where divine judgment isn't just, arbitrary wrath. The devastation that is coming is actually aimed entirely at covenant renewal.
Wow. So the punishment has a purpose.
Yes. It's a painful, necessary teardown required to rebuild a genuine relationship. It's not just destruction for destruction's sake.
That concept of a necessary teardown doesn't carry much weight unless we understand what exactly was being torn down, right?
Right. You need to see the building before the wrecking ball hits.
Exactly. We have to look at the world Hosea was actually standing in when he delivered this message. I mean, the urgency, the sheer panic in the prophet's voice, it only makes sense when you look at the 8th century BCE reality of the northern kingdom.
Which the text often refers to as Israel or Ephraim.
Right. So set the stage for us. What did that world look like?
Well, the timing of Hosea's ministry is critical here. He begins prophesying during the reign of Jeroboam II. This places us roughly between 786 and 746 BCE.
Okay, so mid-8th century.
Yep. And if you were an aristocrat or like a merchant living in the northern capital of Samaria during that specific window, you were living in a golden age.
Things were going well.
Oh, incredibly well.
Yeah.
Israel had secured these highly lucrative trade routes, particularly the King's Highway and the Transjordan. They were basically controlling the flow of goods coming up from Arabia all the way to Damascus.
So they were printing money.
Pretty much. There was territorial expansion. There was a massive influx of wealth and political stability. To the naked eye, the Northern Kingdom was an absolute superpower in the region.
But, and there's always a but in these historical deep dives, that wealth was a facade, wasn't it?
Subtle facade.
Because it was hiding a massive geopolitical threat that was just brewing right over the horizon. While Israel is enjoying this localized, decades-long economic boom, The Assyrian Empire is completely restructuring itself.
Yeah, turning into the most terrifying military machine the ancient world had ever seen.
Right. So what was happening over in Assyria?
Well, Assyria had actually been quiet for a while. They were dealing with internal issues, which is exactly why Jeroboam II was able to expand Israel's borders so easily in the first place.
When the cat's away, the mice will play.
Exactly. But in 745 BCE, this ruler named Tiglath-Pileser III ascends to the Assyrian throne, and he completely changes the game.
He's the one who really ramps things up.
Oh, massively. Before him, empires would typically, campaign in the spring, collect some tribute from their neighbors, and then send the army home so everyone could harvest their crops.
Like part-time warfare.
Right. But Tiglath-Pileser, he created a massive professional standing army. He turned Assyria into a year-round engine of conquest.
That's terrifying.
It gets worse. His foreign policy wasn't just about collecting taxes. It was about total subjugation and mass deportation.
Wait, mass deportation?
Yeah, he would conquer a nation, rip the entire population out of their homeland, and just scatter them across the empire. The goal was to completely destroy their national identity so they couldn't rebel.
So Hosea is standing in his own society, which is wealthy, fat, and happy, and he is looking east at this unstoppable war machine that is systematically devouring every nation in its path.
He sees the writing on the wall.
He knows the clock is ticking toward what will eventually be the brutal siege and fall of Samaria in 722 BCE under Shalmaneser V.
Which is exactly what happens.
But I want to scrutinize the internal situation of Israel for a moment, because prophets are naturally wired to sound the alarm, right? Their rhetoric is intentionally heightened.
For sure, they use big language.
So beyond Hosea's fiery poetry, what concrete evidence do we actually have that the society under Jeroboam II was rotting from the inside out? Are we just taking his word for it?
No, we don't have to just take his word for it. The archaeological record actually provides a really fascinating validation of Hosea's social critique.
Oh, really? What did they find?
It's specifically through a collection of artifacts known as the Samaria Ostraka. They were found in the ruins of the northern capital.
Okay, for those who don't know, what is an ostrakon?
Ah, right. Ostraka are essentially administrative receipts, but they're written on broken shards of pottery. Because papyrus was incredibly expensive back then, bureaucrats would just use literal trash pottery fragments to log daily transactions.
Clever. So what do these receipts tell us?
Well, the Samaria Ostraka date precisely to this 8th century period, and they record massive, continuous shipments of aged wine and refined cosmetic oil from the surrounding agricultural districts directly into the capital.
Destined for the wealthy elites, I'm assuming?
Exactly, designated for specific aristocratic estates.
Okay, but that sounds like standard ancient taxation. A kingdom needs resources to function, right?
Yeah.
Why is that proof of a rotten society?
Because it goes much deeper than standard taxation. What the Ostraka reveal is a highly stratified, deeply exploitative economic shift.
Explain that. What shifted?
In earlier periods, the Israelite economy was basically built on small, family-owned plots of land. It was focused on subsistence farming, growing wheat, barley, things to just keep your family alive.
Right.
But the Ostraka showed that a centralized bureaucratic machinery had forced a shift toward cash crops. The elites in Samaria were accumulating all the land, pushing the peasant farmers into tenant farming or literal debt slavery.
So they stole the family farms?
Basically. And then they forced them to produce luxury goods, like the fine wine and expensive oils, just for the aristocracy. The people actually working the land were starving, while the elites were stockpiling luxury commodities.
Oh, wow. So when Hosea explicitly condemns the deceit, the violence, and the predatory leadership of the elites,
The Samaria Ostraka shows the exact paper trail of how that exploitation was managed. It's hard proof.
that economic disparity is staggering. But Hosea's critique isn't limited to just a wealth gap, is it? The core of his indictment is that this economic exploitation is the direct result of a profound spiritual collapse.
That's the root of the disease, yeah.
The Northern Kingdom was engaging in a very specific kind of religious syncretism. They hadn't abandoned the idea of the supernatural. They were just aggressively mixing and matching their theology.
They maintained the vocabulary of their historical faith while completely abandoning its substance. That's the tragedy of it.
What did that look like in practice?
They still invoke the name of YHWH, right? The God of the Exodus, the deity who had established the foundational covenant with them at Sinai. But they dragged that worship into localized cult centers.
Like Bethel and Gilgal.
Exactly. Places that had a very long history of Canaanite religious practices. I mean, Jeroboam I, centuries earlier, had actually set up golden calves at these sites, just to prevent his people from traveling south to Jerusalem to worship.
It was a political move that had massive spiritual consequences.
Exactly. And by the 8th century, the worship of YHWH had become deeply, deeply entangled with the worship of Baal.
The Canaanite storm and fertility god.
Right.
It's a compartmentalization of loyalties. It's like they wanted the historical identity that came with YHWH. He was the god of the national narrative, the deliverer from Egypt.
Sure, he's good for the history books.
But when it came to the practical day-to-day anxiety of an agrarian society, needing rain, needing the crops to grow, needing the flocks to multiply, they turned to Baal because Baal was the specialist in agricultural fertility.
They were just covering their bases. It's spiritual hedging.
Like someone wearing a wedding ring but keeping an active dating profile just in case.
That is a perfect analogy. And again, the material culture from this era captures this entanglement perfectly.
What else did the archaeologists find?
One of the most significant extra-biblical discoveries for this period are the Kuntalet Ajrud inscriptions.
Kuntalet Arud. Got it.
They were found at this remote way station down in the Sinai Desert, dating to around this exact same era. And the inscriptions contain a blessing written in early Hebrew that explicitly invokes YHWH of Samaria and his Asherah.
Wow. Wait, his Asherah.
Yes. Asherah was a major Canaanite mother goddess. She was often associated with fertility and sometimes considered the consort of the high god El, or Baal.
To see the god of the Sinai covenant literally paired with a Canaanite goddess on a piece of ancient pottery, that just shows how deep the syncretism went.
It's mind-blowing. The religion hadn't just faded. It had been actively hybridized into something entirely unrecognizable.
This wasn't a society that was slightly off course. This was a society that had completely lost its defining identity.
And that profound, entrenched amnesia requires a completely different kind of prophetic intervention.
Right. A standard sermon in the town square about, returning to the ancient paths would have just been ignored.
Absolutely. The people were way too wealthy and way too spiritually numb to listen to a traditional warning. They'd just tune it out.
So the severity of the spiritual crisis demanded a living, breathing sign act, something that would force the public to pay attention. God commands Hosea's own life, his own domestic reality, to become the message.
Which brings us to the scandalous sign act itself, right at the opening chapters of the book.
Yes. God commands Hosea to go and marry a wife of whoredom, a woman named Gomer, who will be serially unfaithful to him.
It is the interpretive crucible of the entire book.
We have to address the reality of what is happening here, because I think anyone reading this has the same immediate question.
Is it literal?
Yes. Is this a literal historical event? Did the God of the Hebrew Bible actually command a prophet to enter into an abusive, humiliating, one-sided marriage? Or is this just an elaborate literary device, like a hypothetical allegory meant to shock the reader without requiring the prophet to actually suffer this reality?
Well, the debate over whether this is literal or symbolic has raged among scholars for literally centuries.
I can imagine.
Yeah. Those who argue for an allegory often do so from a protective theological stance. They suggest a holy deity would never mandate a prophet to defile himself in such a union. It just seems out of character to them.
It's hard to stomach.
It is. But the prevailing consensus, and honestly the most natural reading of the Hebrew text, points heavily toward a literal historical marriage.
Wait, really?
Yeah. Prophetic sign acts in the ancient Near East were visceral, physical realities. They weren't just thought experiments.
Yep.
Isaiah walked stripped and barefoot for 3 years. Ezekiel lay on his side for over a year and cooked his food over dung.
Wow, okay.
The physical suffering of the prophet was a necessary component of the message. The medium was the message.
To understand the weight of a literal marriage to Gomer, we really have to view it through the lens of an ancient honor-shame culture.
That is crucial.
Because in the ancient Near East, marriage was not primarily a private romantic endeavor like we think of it today. It was a highly public, legally binding social contract. It involved extended families and your standing in the community.
Exactly. It was about your public reputation.
So for a prominent prophetic figure to legally bind himself to a woman with a known reputation for promiscuity, or a woman who would continually abandon the marriage bed for other lovers, the resulting public disgrace would be absolute.
Unimaginable. The whispers in the city gates, the overt mockery, the profound loss of social standing.
And that public humiliation was the mechanism of the prophecy. Hosea's shame in the town square was designed to be a microscopic reflection of the shame and betrayal YHWH experienced watching Israel chase after foreign gods and foreign alliances.
The prophet had to physically endure the emotional agony of the divine. He had to feel what God was feeling. And the tragedy compounds because the sign act extends beyond the marriage itself to the next generation.
The children.
Yes, Hosea and Gomer have children, and the names God assigns to these children are effectively walking billboards of national doom. Naming a child in antiquity carried immense theological and prophetic weight. And these names, they are terrifying.
Let's walk through them. The first child, a son, is named Jezreel. The name itself points to a specific geographic valley, but more importantly, it points to a horrific historical bloodbath, right?
Yeah, Jezreel was the site of a brutal political coup roughly a century earlier. It was orchestrated by a man named Jehu. You can actually read the whole historical account in 2 Kings.
What happened there?
Well, Jehu was commissioned to wipe out the corrupt dynasty of King Ahab. But Jehu took it way too far. He turned the commission into an absolute massacre. He slaughtered not just the royal family, but political officials, associates, and even visiting dignitaries from the southern kingdom of Judah.
A total bloodbath.
And he built his own dynasty on that foundation of rampant bloodshed. And here is the kicker. The dynasty Jeroboam II belongs to in Hosea's day. That is Jehu's dynasty.
Oh, wow.
So by naming the child Jezreel, God is declaring that the bill for that historical violence has finally come due. The house of Jehu will be judged, and the military power of Israel will be broken in the valley of Jezreel. It is a political death sentence.
That is heavy for a kid to carry around.
Very.
And then there's the second child, a daughter named Lo-Ruhamah. And in the ancient legal context, the concept of maternal or paternal pity wasn't just about an internal feeling of sadness, was it?
No, not at all.
It was about the legal obligation a parent had to protect and provide for their offspring. And the name Lo-Ruhamah translates to not pitied or no mercy.
The legal protection is being formally withdrawn. That's what that name means. God is stating that the steadfast patience that has protected the northern kingdom from the consequences of their actions, that patience is just evaporated.
And if that wasn't bad enough, the final child, another son, receives the most devastating name of all, Loam.
Which translates to, not my people.
That one gives me chills. To understand the finality of this, we have to go back to the foundational architecture of the Israelite faith. When God brought the people out of Egypt, the establishment of the Sinai covenant was built on a specific, recurring legal formula.
I will be your God, and you will be my people.
Exactly. It is the cornerstone of their entire national existence.
Yeah.
So by naming this child Lo-Ami, God is legally uttering the formula of ancient Near Eastern divorce.
He is nullifying the Sinai covenant. He is declaring, you are no longer mine, and I am no longer yours.
It is the complete unraveling of their identity. I mean, looking at the geopolitical reality with Tiglath-Pileser III building his war machine and looking at the theological reality of not my people, the natural conclusion is that the narrative is over. The Northern Kingdom is finished. Roll the credits.
Right, you'd think that's the end of the book.
But just as the judgment reaches its absolute peak, the text presents an astonishing plot twist. A mechanism of grace in chapter 3. Gomer has completely abandoned the marriage. She's fallen into absolute destitution, likely having sold herself or been forced into debt slavery just to survive.
She's hit rock bottom.
And God speaks to Hosea again, and the command is staggering. He says, go again, love a woman who is loved by another man and is an adulteress, even as the Lord loves the children of Israel. Hosea has to go into the slave market and purchase his own wife back.
And the economic specifics of this transaction are deeply revealing. Hosea pays 15 shekels of silver and a homer and a lethek of barley.
What does that tell us?
Well, in ancient Near Eastern law, which we can see in texts like the Code of Hammurabi, or even later biblical laws in Leviticus, 30 shekels of silver was the standard compensation price for a slave.
Okay, 30 shekels.
Right. Hosea pays half that price in silver, 15 shekels, and makes up the rest of the value in barley.
Barley is just animal feed, essentially, right?
Exactly. It paints a picture of a woman whose value in the eyes of society has completely bottomed out. She is worth the absolute minimum, and half of that is paid in grain. Hosea publicly humbles himself, steps into the filth of that market, pays the redemption price, and brings her back to his home, demanding strict fidelity moving forward.
This action completely redefines the nature of the judgment that was just pronounced.
How so?
Well, the exile, the impending destruction of Samaria, the withdrawal of mercy, none of it is arbitrary vindictiveness. It is a severe, devastating discipline, but it is not abandonment. God is willing to go into the darkest, most degrading circumstances to redeem a people who have entirely sold themselves out.
Yeah, the private drama of the marriage establishes the framework. And from
Mhm.
chapter 4 onward, that framework is projected onto the entire nation.
The format of the text actually shifts here, doesn't it?
It does. It moves into a formal rib, which is the Hebrew term for a covenant lawsuit.
A covenant lawsuit. What does that mean in an ancient context?
In the ancient Near East, when a vassal nation rebelled against a suzerain king, say, by withholding tribute or making alliances with a rival empire, the suzerain wouldn't just attack instantly. They would send emissaries to formally read the charges of treaty violation before taking military action.
Like reading them their rights before the arrest.
Sort of, yeah. And in this text, Hosea is acting as the prosecuting attorney for the suzerain God, laying out the legal charges against the vassal state of Israel.
The opening statement of this lawsuit cuts straight to the root of the issue. Hosea declares, "There is no faithfulness or steadfast love and no knowledge of God in the land." And the text uses two incredibly loaded Hebrew terms here that we need to unpack.
Yes, that had hunchim, which is the knowledge of God, and ist, which translates to steadfast, loyal love.
Let's start with knowledge, because when we hear knowledge in a modern Western context, we tend to think of Greek intellectualism, the accumulation of data, passing a theology exam, memorizing historical facts.
Rote memorization.
Right, but that is not what is at stake here at all.
Not even a little. In ancient Hebrew thought, knowledge is fundamentally experiential and relational. It is the intimate knowledge a husband has of a wife, or the deep familiarity between two parties bound by a treaty.
It's personal.
Deeply personal. So when God indicts the priests, stating, "Because you have rejected knowledge, I reject you from being a priest to me," he is prosecuting them for relational amnesia.
Relational amnesia, I like that phrase.
The spiritual leaders have abandoned the ethical obligations and the intimacy of the covenant. They forgot the character of the God they supposedly served. And because the leadership failed to model this data Joshim, the entire populace has been swept into a moral vacuum.
A vacuum characterized by swearing, lying, murder, stealing, and committing adultery, according to the text.
It's a total societal breakdown.
And Hosea's prosecution relies on a series of brilliant, striking metaphors to expose the absurdity of Israel's behavior. I love this part. He refers to the nation as a half-baked cake.
Which is just a devastating critique of their societal structure.
Explain the cake metaphor for us.
Imagine a flatbread or a cake placed on a hot griddle, right? But it's never turned over. So the bottom is scorched. It's burnt to a crisp and completely inedible, while the top remains raw, runny dough.
Ruined on both sides.
Exactly. Hosea is looking at a society where the wealthy elites are the scorched bottom. They're overcooked by greed, hardened by luxury and corruption. And the marginalized peasants are the raw, top undeveloped, neglected, and useless to the defense of the nation. The entire society is structurally compromised and entirely unfit for consumption.
That is such a vivid image. Another dominant metaphor Hosea employs is the false lovers motif, which directly connects the spiritual adultery of the calf cults to the disastrous foreign policy of the northern kingdom.
The political side of the betrayal.
Yes. As the Assyrian threat grew, Israel didn't respond by reforming their society or turning to their covenant God for protection. Instead, they acted like a frantic, unfaithful spouse, soliciting protection from rival empires.
And the historical records perfectly align with Hosea's imagery here. We see Israelite kings acting with sheer diplomatic schizophrenia.
Bouncing back and forth.
Constantly. I mean, King Menahem of Israel extracts massive wealth from his own citizens to pay a staggering tribute to King Pul of Assyria, who was actually Tiglath-Pileser III, just to secure his throne.
So, paying off the bully.
Exactly. But then, a few years later, King Hoshea stops paying the Assyrian tribute and sends envoys to King Zo-Insulkaz, hoping the Egyptians will act as a military buffer against the Assyrians.
Hosea compares Israel to a silly dove without sense, fluttering wildly between the Egyptian vulture and the Assyrian eagle.
They fundamentally misdiagnosed their problem. They believed they were suffering from a lack of military alliances, when in reality, their political instability was the direct consequence of their spiritual infidelity.
They are frantically trying to buy security from the very empires that are looking to consume them.
It's tragic.
And the most damning piece of evidence in the lawsuit is that throughout all this political maneuvering and societal exploitation, they were still religiously active.
Oh, yeah? They didn't stop going to the temple?
They were still offering sacrifices, celebrating the new moons, observing the Sabbath, but God entirely rejects their worship. He states that their multiplied altars have simply become multiplied sins.
This is a profound theological critique. Worship that is divorced from covenant ethics is functionally idolatry.
They had reduced the creator of the universe to a transactional commodity.
They believed they could manipulate divine favor the same way they paid tribute to a foreign king. They thought, hey, if we bring enough bulls to the altar at Bethel, God has to provide the rain, regardless of how we treat the poor in the streets of Samaria.
Just putting coins in the vending machine.
Yes, and Hosea shatters that illusion. You cannot sever liturgy from justice. Offering a flawless animal sacrifice while perpetuating systemic violence against your neighbor is an absolute abomination to the covenant.
So the prosecution has laid out an airtight case. The spiritual syncretism, the political betrayals, the economic exploitation, the hollow rituals, the guilt is absolute.
The verdict is guilty.
And at this point in a covenant lawsuit, the expected outcome is the final execution of the sentence. The suzerain king should deploy the armies, wipe the rebellious vassal off the map, and be done with the experiment.
That's how it worked in the ancient world.
But in chapter 11, the text executes one of the most stunning pivots in all of ancient literature. The setting shifts from a severe courtroom to a quiet nursery, and we are given a window into the psychological agony of God.
Chapter 11 is universally recognized as the theological and emotional nucleus of the book. The imagery of the betrayed husband is set aside, and God is suddenly portrayed as a fiercely devoted, deeply grieving parent.
It's such a shift in tone.
It really is. He recounts the early days of the nation, saying, "When Israel was a child, I loved him, and out of Egypt I called my son." He describes himself as a father teaching a toddler Ephraim how to walk, holding him by the arms, bending down to feed him, acting as a gentle healer.
But the tragedy is that the more the father called to the child, the further the child ran away, sacrificing to the Baals.
The prophet uses a literary device known as anthropopathic language here.
Anthropopathic language, meaning what exactly?
It means ascribing profound human emotion and suffering to the divine. He does this to communicate a reality that just transcends human logic. We see a God who is entirely justified in executing wrath, yet who is experiencing a catastrophic internal conflict over the necessity of that judgment.
The text says, "How can I give you up, O Ephraim? How can I hand you over, O Israel? My heart recoils within me. My compassion grows warm and tender." The tension here is immense, right? So God is furious about the sin, but absolutely shattered at the thought of abandoning them. How does he resolve that?
Well, he refuses to resolve it with cheap sentimentality. God is perfectly holy, meaning he cannot simply ignore the gross injustices and the idolatry. He cannot validate a corrupt society.
The judgment must fall.
Yes, the Assyrian army will indeed breach the walls of Samaria. But his covenantal love, his dirs, demands that annihilation cannot be the final word. He declares, "I will not execute my burning anger. I will not again destroy Ephraim. For I am God and not a man, the Holy One in your midst."
That distinction, for I am God and not a man, is the hinge upon which the entire theology of hope turns. Human anger is entirely destructive. I mean, when a human is betrayed to this degree, their wrath demands the total eradication of the offending party.
We want revenge.
Exactly. But divine holiness operates differently. God's holiness is the very mechanism that restrains his wrath. His discipline is severe, but it leaves room for a resurrection on the other side of the exile.
And this framework doesn't just resolve the immediate crisis in Hosea's day. It establishes a macro narrative that dictates the rest of the biblical canon. Scholars often refer to Hosea as the gospel pattern before the gospel.
Because it outlines the whole arc.
Yes. If you trace the theological movement of this book, you see the entire redemptive historical arc. It begins with election, God choosing a people. That is followed by deep covenant infidelity. This rebellion inevitably provokes a severe judgment. But that judgment acts as a crucible leading to repentance, which culminates in an ultimate restoration.
And this precise sequence is the blueprint for the New Testament.
Entirely.
And the New Testament writers explicitly recognize this architecture. They consistently draw upon Hosea's specific language to articulate the identity and mission of Jesus.
Oh, all the time.
Like when Jesus is confronted by the Pharisees in the Gospel of Matthew, specifically in chapters 9 and 12, when he is criticized for eating with tax collectors and sinners, he doesn't offer a new theological defense. He quotes Hosea 6.6.
He tells the religious elite, "Go and learn what this means. I desire mercy and not sacrifice."
Jesus is indicting the first century religious establishment with the exact same charge Hosea leveled against the 8th century priests.
Right? The Pharisees had perfected the external rituals and the purity laws, but they were entirely devoid of that loyal, steadfast, merciful love. They had the mechanics of religion without the heart of the covenant.
It's exactly what Hosea was angry about. Furthermore, Hosea plants a seed of specific messianic hope in the midst of the darkest judgments. In chapter 3, after purchasing Gomer back from slavery, Hosea outlines a period of isolation for Israel, a long stretch where they will exist without a king, without a prince, and without the sacrificial system.
The exile, essentially.
Yes. But verse 5 contains a vital promise. Afterward, the children of Israel shall return and seek the Lord their God and David their king. Considering the historical David had been dead for centuries when Hosea wrote this, the text is projecting a future, ultimate Davidic monarch who will accomplish the final restoration.
And the early Christian community understood Jesus to be the fulfillment of that Davidic promise. But the connections go even deeper, extending into the profound theology of the resurrection itself.
Oh, with Paul.
Yes. When the Apostle Paul writes to the Corinthians articulating the ultimate victory of Christ over the grave, he reaches right back to Hosea 13.1. Paul writes, "O death, where is your victory? O death, where is your sting?"
In Hosea's original context, that language was used to summon death and the grave as instruments of impending judgment against a rebellious nation.
Right, it was a threat.
Yeah.
But Paul, viewing the text through the reality of an empty tomb, sees that dynamic entirely inverted. Christ has entered into the judgment, Hosea announced. He has absorbed the sting of death on behalf of the broken covenant, and he has swallowed it up in victory.
And if we look at the overarching architecture, the ultimate typology of the book, Hosea and Gomer's scandalous marriage serves as the foundational vocabulary for how the New Testament describes Christ and the church.
You see it woven throughout Ephesians 5 and the Book of Revelation.
The narrative of a bridegroom who willingly subjects himself to public humiliation, who pays an agonizing, unimaginable cost, not 15 shekels of silver, but his own life, to redeem a bride who had sold herself into slavery, to wash her clean and restore her to honor.
It's beautiful. Hosea acted out a shadow of this redemption in the dusty slave markets of the ancient Near East, but the New Testament claims that Jesus executed the reality of it on a cosmic scale.
It is a staggering theological continuity. The humiliation of the prophet was not an arbitrary cruelty, it was a necessary revelation of the lengths to which the divine would go to rescue humanity from its own self-destruction.
Which brings us to the application. Because looking at this objectively, we have to pull these ancient realities into the present.
Right. Why should you, listening to this today, care about a critique of an 8th century BCE agrarian society threatened by Assyrian imperialism?
Because the historical specifics have changed, but the underlying mechanisms of human behavior remain identical. Hosea provides an absolutely lethal critique of the human tendency to divorce religious practice from ethical reality.
If you've ever felt disgusted by performative religion, where people say all the right liturgical words on Sunday but exploit others on Monday, Hosea is your guy.
He is. It is a permanent warning against the commodification of intimacy. When relationships, whether with the divine or with other human beings, become purely transactional, society begins to rot.
And Hosea exposes the danger of trusting in wealth, military superiority, or political alliances as the ultimate source of security.
The ancient Israelites looked to the Assyrian war machine and the Egyptian treasury for safety. Modern societies look to economic supremacy, technological advancements, or partisan political power.
But Hosea's analysis is that any false lover you rely on to save you will eventually be the very thing that consumes you.
But the text does not leave the reader in a state of condemnation. That's the beauty of it.
Right, the entire purpose of exposing the rot is to issue a profound invitation to return. The Hebrew concept here is hob, which means to turn back or to repent. However, Hosea goes to great lengths to differentiate between a genuine return and a shallow, manipulative apology.
In chapter 6, we actually see the people attempt a superficial repentance. They say, "Come, let us return to the Lord, for he has torn us. that he may heal us.
It sounds pious.
It does, but God immediately rejects it. Why? Because they are treating God like a physician who is obligated to patch them up so they can go right back to their destructive behavior.
They wanted the Band-Aid, not the cure.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They wanted the benefits of healing without the structural, moral transformation of the covenant. True Shub demands a complete reorientation of the self. It is not merely a verbal apology to escape the consequences of the Assyrian invasion. It is a fundamental return to Ust and justice.
It changes how you live your life.
It changes how you conduct commerce, how you structure your society, and how you care for the vulnerable.
It is the realization that you haven't just broken a legal rule, you have shattered a relationship. And when that realization leads to a genuine return, the conclusion of Hosea is breathtakingly beautiful. After chapters filled with the imagery of scorched earth, predatory lions, and ruined crops, chapter 14 offers a vision of total ecological and spiritual renewal.
God states, I will heal their apostasy. I will love them freely, for my anger has turned from them. He abandons the language of the courtroom completely and returns to the language of creation.
He promises, I will be like the dew to Israel. He shall blossom like the lily. He shall take root like the trees of Lebanon.
Which is so significant. In an arid agrarian climate that had been decimated by drought and warfare, the promise of the gentle, life-giving dew represents the restoration of absolute communion.
To summarize the vast terrain we've covered today, we started by observing a deeply scandalous public marriage in a society that was economically thriving but morally bankrupt. We analyzed the mechanisms of that society's collapse, driven by spiritual syncretism and arrogant political maneuvering. And finally, we witnessed the persistent, radically costly ease of a God who buys back his unfaithful people from the slave market.
It's an incredible journey.
Before we conclude this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought regarding the mechanics of this entire narrative. Throughout our analysis, we've observed the immense tension between severe judgment and relentless love.
They seem like opposites.
Exactly. In modern frameworks, we almost exclusively view judgment and love as antithetical. We assume that if you truly love someone, you tolerate their actions, you don't judge them. But Hosea forces a completely different paradigm upon the reader. Hosea insists that judgment is not the opposite of love, it is an active instrument of it.
That's a challenging idea.
It is. Consider the geopolitical and social reality we discussed. If God had looked at the elites in Samaria systematically crushing the peasant farmers, if he had watched the spiritual adultery and the political betrayals and simply maintained the status quo out of tolerance, that wouldn't be love.
It would be profound apathy.
Exactly. Apathy is the true opposite of love. God's discipline, the dismantling of their false alliances, the stripping away of their ill-gotten wealth, isn't evidence of his absence. It is the fiery, undeniable proof of his presence. He disrupts their reality because he refuses to let them successfully destroy themselves.
Wow.
The diary of this broken marriage challenges us to reevaluate how we view severe consequences. It proposes a framework where the painful tearing down of our own false securities might not be an act of divine retribution, but the exact mechanism required to initiate a genuine return. It leaves the reader with the radical proposition that the judge of the cosmos is also the bridegroom, and he is willing to pay an unimaginable price to bring the story to a restoration.